A couple of months ago, I swung by the International Mission Board on Monument Avenue to pick up my lunch date. Jeff Waligora, Southern Baptist missionary who has spent the last 17 years living and working in China. I had heard Jeff speak a few months earlier at the International Mission Breakfast hosted by the strong, mission-minded women of Richmond's First Baptist Church. And I had enjoyed it so much, had enjoyed him so much. I felt a kind of instant kinship with him. So when we talked after breakfast, I said, you're working just up the street from First Baptist Church. We should get together sometime for lunch or coffee. And so we looked at our calendars and settled on February the 18th, the earliest date that we could schedule. I swung around under the portico and Jeff came out and got in the car. I said, "Where do you want to go to lunch?" He said, "Your choice." I said, "Okay." And that's how we ended up sitting in the pew of St. Paul's Episcopal Church on Ash Wednesday. It was the beginning of their Lenten luncheon series, and because it was Wednesday, it was also the day they served their ever-popular cheese souffle. Some people say it is the best meal in town on Wednesday. But on top of that, St. Paul's has the money to bring in these terrific speakers from across the country and around the city, nationally known authors and speakers and local celebrities preach from the pulpit of St. Paul's during the Lenten Luncheon Series. It's a pleasure to go and a pleasure to hear what they have to say. So there we were, Jeff and I sitting in our pew at St. Paul's waiting for the guest speaker to make his big entrance when the door swung open, and in walked Ben Campbell. Some of you know Ben. He is the senior pastor at Richmond Hill. He's a good friend of mine. I love to hear him preach. But I must confess I was a little disappointed when I found out that he would be preaching that day instead of the scheduled speaker whose flight had been delayed. But then he began to preach. And it was good. And at one point, he said something so provocative, I sat straight up in my pew. He was talking about treasures in heaven, and he said, one of the great things about those treasures is that they won't cost you anything. And then he moved on to something else, leaving me to wonder how he could mean what he said. Do the Episcopalians have a different Bible than we have? Doesn't Jesus say in their Bible that if you want to follow him, you have to deny yourself and take up your cross? Is that not part of their tradition as well? I was still asking myself those questions when Ben circled back a few minutes later, as I should have known he would. He said, "It is kind of a trick for me to say that the treasures in heaven cost you nothing. Actually, they cost you your life. But the point is this: you are already spending your life. I am already spending my life. The treasures in heaven could not cost more than what I am already spending. The only real possibility is that I might find more value in my investment. They cost me nothing because I am already spending everything. That is the one thing about which I have no choice. I must spend everything. Every day, the day's charge is taken out of my account. I do not know exactly how much is in there, but one day, involuntarily, my last penny will be spent. So, since I am spending it all, I would like to know that I have found the real treasure, at least some, and that I have given my life to its pursuit. Which made me glad that the guest speaker's flight had been delayed. There are some stories in the Bible that I come back to again and again, and our gospel reading for this morning is one of them. where Jesus asks his disciples on the road near Caesarea Philippi, "Who do people say that I am?" Even though Jesus acknowledges in that passage that he is the Messiah, he makes it clear that he is not the Messiah Peter thinks he is. He has not come to conquer and rule, at least not this time around, but to suffer and die. And then he invites us to join him. "If any of you want to come with me," he says, "deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me." It is so contrary to our usual way of thinking that, like Peter, we might find ourselves rebuking Jesus, telling him that that's not what life is for. Many of you have been reading the book, The Good and Beautiful Life by James Bryan Smith, as part of our Lenten study. And you know that Smith talks about false narratives, the false narratives people often live by. Christy looked up from that book a few weeks ago and said, "What are some of the false narratives you grew up with?" And I thought about it for a minute and then said, well, when I was in prep school, I don't know that anybody ever said it out loud, but everybody seemed to live by the idea that if you worked hard and got good grades, you could get into a good college. And if you graduated from a good college, you could get a good job. And if you got a good job, you could make a lot of money. If you made a lot of money, you could buy a lot of things. And if you had a lot of things, you would live happily ever after. It was a success story, but it was all about individual success. It was all about me getting everything I could grab. It was the pursuit of personal happiness. But what if I did it and discovered, as some of my classmates have, that grabbing everything you can get does not necessarily make for a good and beautiful life? What if I found myself, as some of them have, hugely disappointed by the emptiness and shallowness of a life full of things? As my friend Ben Campbell says, we only have one life to spend. Wouldn't it be important to spend it on what matters most? And that's when Jesus offers this surprising alternative to the false narratives of the world. He says, those who want to save their life will lose it, but those who lose their life for my sake and the sake of the gospel will find it. And it makes me wonder, what does he mean by that? It may help to look a little more closely at the words Jesus uses. He says that those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life will save it. The words lose and save mean about what you think they would, but the word that he uses for life is a little more complicated. Do you know how some of our English words have Greek roots? The word hippopotamus, for example, is the Greek word hippo, which means horse, and the Greek word potamus, which means river, so that hippopotamus means river horse. Some of you are nodding as if you have always known that. But the Greek word used for life in this passage is not the word you might expect. It's not bios, from which we get biology, the study of life. Rather, it is psyche or psyche, from which we get psychology, the study of the mind. If you lose your life, you will find it, Jesus says. Does he mean that if you lose your mind, you will find it? No, although that would be comforting for many of us in this room. For him and for Mark, who wrote his gospel in Greek, the word psyche would have meant something more like soul or self, and that's helpful. Have you ever heard people talk about losing themselves in something? Whatever it is, painting a picture, listening to music, cooking a meal, solving a problem, playing a sport. They talk about being so involved in that, whatever it is at the moment, that they simply lose themselves. They lose that ever-present awareness of themselves. They lose that crippling sense of self-consciousness. And when that happens, it is one of the most liberating experiences a human being can have. Last Tuesday morning, I was talking to the staff and mentioned that I had introduced our resident, Nick Deere, to a group of people the day before. I said, "This is Nick. He's our resident. He graduated from Truett Seminary in Waco, Texas, but he came to Virginia to work with the best church staff in America." And then I looked at my staff and said, "You are the best church staff in America, and the work we get to do is the best work in the world." We talked about it for a little while, and then I said, sometimes when I'm counseling with someone, when I'm listening carefully to what they're saying, when I'm focused on them and thinking how I can help, when I say a prayer for them at the end of that session, I lose myself in ministry. I step outside my own concerns. I stand above my own anxieties. In that moment, I am so focused on that person that everything else fades away. And I said, those are some of the moments when I am most fully alive. And they nodded and agreed that they often have that same sort of experience. I'm not the best example of that kind of ministry in this church. I could point to 100 other people who are better at it than I am. But I know something of what it means to lose myself in service to others. And I know that those are the moments I come alive. Preaching professor David Lose says he was watching the Academy Awards last week when he saw something that helped him articulate not only this passage, but the whole gospel. He said he was watching a performance of the song Glory from the movie Selma. And he said, what struck me was how songwriters John Legend and Common described the march from Selma to Montgomery in terms of glory. Think about that for a moment, he says. That march, along with the larger struggle for civil rights, was filled with confrontation and suffering and sacrifice. And yet they sing of glory. Why? Precisely because we find glory only in those moments when we surrender our claims to glory in order to serve others. We know this, he said. You and I and the people we preach to, we all know this. Because each and every time we make ourselves vulnerable to the needs of those around us, each time we give ourselves in love to another, each time we get out of our own way and seek not what we want, but what the world needs, we come alive. We are uplifted. We experience the glory of God made manifest. Those who want to save their life will lose it, Jesus said. Those who are so focused on themselves and their lives and whether or not they are everything they hoped they would be, one day those people will wake up and hear the last penny clink into the coffer and know that their time is up and they still don't have the life they were looking for. On the other hand, those who lose their life, who give it away freely in service to others for Jesus' sake and the sake of the gospel, those people will find themselves more fully alive than they have ever been before, caught up so completely in the meaning and purpose of service that the last thing they are thinking about is themselves. How's it going for you? Someone will ask. And they will say, for me? I don't know. Hadn't thought about that in weeks. But ask me how it's going for Dave, or for Sally, or for Richmond, or for the kingdom, It's amazing. Ben Campbell says, I have to spend my entire life. That is the one thing about which I have no choice. So, since I am spending it all, I would like to know that I have found the real treasure, at least some, and that I have given my life to its pursuit. Isn't that what we would all like to know? That we have found the real treasure, at least some, and that we have given ourselves to its pursuit. Come, Jesus says, follow me. Follow me, and I will show you how to do this, how to give yourself away in service to others. And then he demonstrates exactly what he has just said. Takes up his cross. He goes to Jerusalem. He gives himself in service to others. He loses his life in order to find it. And on that night, the same night that he was betrayed, he took bread. And when he had blessed it, he broke it and said to his disciples, "This is my body. It is given for you. Whenever you eat this, do it in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup after supper and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. It is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Whenever you drink this cup, do it in remembrance of me." For nearly 2,000 years now, Jesus' followers have been doing that. They have been remembering him. What's interesting is who they haven't remembered. Tiberius Caesar. Do you know that name? He was the Roman emperor in the time of Jesus. He was the king of the known world. Everybody knew his name. But these days, not so much. I have never heard anybody hit their thumb with a hammer and shout out, "Tiberius Caesar!" It's that other one we remember. One of his subjects, a poor carpenter from Nazareth who gave himself away in service to others. We eat the bread that represents his body. We drink the wine that represents his blood. We hunger and thirst for who he is and long to take more of him into ourselves. There is something so good and beautiful about his life that we want it. We want it for our own, no matter what it cost, even if it cost us everything. I mean, we have to spend our life on something, right? Why not spend it on the thing that matters most?